So welcome everybody to the October webinar hosted by ODLAA in conjunction. ODLAA, it stands for the Open and Distance Learning Association of Australia, and it's in conjunction with FLANZ, which is the Flexible Learning Association of New Zealand. In case you weren't aware, ODLAA is an international professional association of educators from all level and areas, as it says on the screen at the moment. People who belong to the association and who are interested in the work of the association are dedicated to the advancement of research, practice and support of education that happens across time and space. One of the great attractions of ODLAA is its journal. It's called Distance Education. As a member of ODLAA, you receive a hard copy of the journal published, all of the issues published during the length of your membership. So it's a really good, it's a good bonus. Not all professional associations provide that. Many of the topics of our webinar series this year have been presented by authors who published in issues of the journal. And once again, that's the case for today's webinar. I'd like to introduce you to the authors of an article published in the February 2022 issue. Welcome, Nara Martirosyan. No, sorry, Nara, I had it. Nara Martirosyan and Patrick Saxon, both from the Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, USA, and Sandra Lee Coleman from the College of the Mainland, Texas City. And their article is called Doctoral Students' Perceptions of Student-Led Discussion Forums in Online Classes. Sorry, multitasking here. I'm not a very good multitasker. Right. Discussion forums can have such a great potential for learning, but they're not easy to get right. Challenges with structuring them in order to really engage students is not necessarily a straightforward thing to do. In this study, Nara and her colleagues looked at the roles and responsibilities of participants, that's the students and the teachers, in effective online discussion forums that they have held, as a way to draw out what it is about them that makes them work well. It's all really fascinating stuff. I think you'd agree. So now I'll hand over to Nara, Patrick, and Sandra to lead us through their presentation. Please feel free to add any comments that you may have or questions to the chat as we go along, and we'll make sure that we look at them during the session or at the end of the session. I'll leave it to you, Nara, Patrick, and Sandra to lead the way, and we look forward now to hearing about your study. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, for having us to present our paper, and thanks for the warm welcome. We are so honored to be here to share the results of our study and how we do student-led discussions in our graduate courses. So I'm here with my colleagues, like you said, Dr. Patrick Saxon and Dr. Sandra Coleman. We will share the presentation. Today, we will provide some numbers on online course enrollment, and then I will ask Dr. Saxon to go over some related literature. Then I will take on the method and findings section, and then I'll ask Dr. Sandra Coleman to do some discussion on implications for practice. So we will kind of follow the structure of the article we had. And then, of course, we will have time for questions and anything that anyone wants to comment or ask. We'll be happy to provide more information. So as we all know, the online course enrollment has gone up, especially after COVID. So on this slide, what we see are some of the recent numbers that came out for undergraduate students in the United States. We are all located in the United States, so we look at more of local numbers. In the fall 2020, about 75% of all undergraduate students in the United States were enrolled in at least one online course. This is a significant number, significant percentage here. And then the second one is 44% of undergraduate students exclusively took distance education courses. So basically, they were taking only online courses only. On the next slide, we have some of the numbers for graduate education. And the percentages are kind of the same, but you would see that the percentage for exclusively distance education courses, 52% for post-baccalaureate students, which is higher than the undergraduate. And this is expected as many of students in post-undergraduate, post-baccalaureate education, they're already working professionals. So they're looking for more flexible options. And it's interesting to see these numbers coming from the National Center for Education Statistics. And if we compare the numbers pre-COVID, the numbers were down. So these numbers are very high, and we expect these numbers will go up, which means that as educators, as faculty, we are teaching in an online environment, and the expectations for quality online offerings will continue to increase. And we will be challenged to find a way to meet the needs of our diverse student populations. And we are teaching, Dr. Saxon and I and Sandra, all of us are teaching online for a number of years now. And in a fully online environment, we are often challenged to create engaged courses with meaningful assessments. And depending whether it's an undergraduate level or graduate, they have their own needs. So we always have to consider the level of the education, but the challenge is always there. We are challenged to create assessments that are meaningful, practical, and they are not just check the box assessments for students, so they get something out of it. And when we look at the literature, we see different types of assessments being used in online education. And some of the assessments we have heard about, discussion boards, like Sarah, you just mentioned. We can't imagine a course without a discussion board. We have seen e-portfolios, group projects, papers being implemented in online teaching and learning. One alternative assessment that we use in online education, especially in graduate courses, graduate level courses, is student-led discussion boards. Patrick and I had the honor of taking classes from Dr. William White, late Dr. William White, who was the first one to implement the student-led discussion boards back in 2007, when online courses were new, and he was trying to find new ways to engage students. So this student-led discussion boards really came from him. He was our professor, and we learned this from him, how to implement. And then after we graduated from the program and became faculty, so we became kind of fan of this activity, because it really engaged students in the topic, in the content, and builds a community. So how do we do the student-led discussion boards? Again, I want to emphasize this is done in a graduate level courses, because this might be challenging to do in undergraduate level courses. So 1 or 2 students are assigned as discussion board leaders. So at the start of the semester, they already know the topic and the week that they are assigned to lead a discussion. They are tasked with creating an initial prompt or choosing one of the suggested ones at the end of the chapter, at the end of the reading, or the instructor might provide questions. So depending on the topic, like for example, if we are having a leadership theory discussion, so we have the chapter, they have to provide the summary of the chapter, and then they also have to come up with 2 practical leadership questions, scenarios or case study questions, or they can pick the ones that the author suggested and modify and offer for discussion. And then the discussion leaders, they post the summary of the chapter and 2 questions before the participants get into the discussion board. So normally we have specific deadlines for them. Discussion leaders have to post their summary along with their 2 questions by Tuesday midnight. And then from Wednesday on, the discussion board is open to everyone, and everyone has to go in and reply to the discussion prompts and respond to the questions brought up by discussion leaders. They have until Thursday or Friday, depending which day the instructor wants, but that's everything is in the instructions or the due dates. By Thursday midnight, everyone responds to the questions, and then they have 3 more days. The discussion leaders go in and read the responses of their classmates and make a comment or a question. So basically, they're reflecting on the questions, on the answers as they were the instructors. So then the Sunday midnight, everything is done. So the discussion week is over. Responsibilities of discussion board leaders are over. So we move on to the next topic. So in the next week, we have different discussion board leaders if we still have a discussion board activity. But sometimes you might not have a discussion board every week. It might be every other week. So again, this is something that the instructor decides and puts in the instructions, in the guidelines. So what we do, we provide explicit guidelines and define expectations for discussion board leaders and participants. So they need to clearly know how many posts, when, what counts what. Because if we don't give guidelines, then they will get confused. And then as an instructor, when the discussion board is going on, we observe the exchange of ideas and we don't intervene unless if it's necessary. When you see they're getting off of track, then you intervene. But most of the times, like I can't recall a case where I intervened because the discussions would just go on. And if it's something that I would feel like I want to intervene, I would wait until the week is over and I do the weekly wrap up and go over the points they made and put some comments there on something I wanted to intervene, but I let them to exchange the ideas. So, so having clear guidelines is very important. And on the next slide, what you see is just a screenshot of the appendix. We included the clear guidelines as an appendix in the article that was published. So you're welcome to just use these guidelines or modify based on your course needs or the needs of your students or the student learning goals. But every time there's a student who gets confused, we revise. We make sure it's even clear. So, but the guidelines are there, so I will not go over, but they're basically spelling out what the expectations of discussion board leaders are and what the participants are supposed to do in a student-led discussion board. So before we present the findings of our study and what we did, I am going to pass it to Dr. Saxon. So he's going to present some literature on this topic, and then we will move on to the actual study.
Okay, thanks, Nara, and thanks to the association for hosting this. We appreciate y'all having us. A little bit about the literature. It was quite limited with respect to literature particular to online graduate teaching and learning. So we expanded the scope to include undergraduate students and studies that didn't state their sample or the population in which they were researching. But some of what we found I thought was rich, and I learned a lot from it. Garrison et al. Described the importance of written communication. That's quite intuitive. It's used primarily or predominantly, I should say, in online classes. It promotes reflection, critical thinking, and deep, meaningful learning, as they describe. And they discerned between online learning versus classroom learning, stating or describing it as online learning promoting a more serious and reflective style of learner engagement, where classroom learning might facilitate creativity and more learner interaction. They concluded that instructor presence in an online discussion is important to critical thinking and meaningful construction of knowledge, and they described specifics about that, about how that happens, and that's there on the bottom of the slide. Orcott and Dringus, they studied the presence of the teacher in online courses, and particular to discussion forum activities. They described instances that increased learner engagement and intellectual curiosity. They concluded that it was helpful for instructors to be involved so that students develop new perspectives and contextualize the content that they're seeing and learning. They describe students who were motivated and engaged, or the teachers describe students who were motivated and engaged. And they described that their role was to play a part in encouraging that motivation. And then once they feel they have that engagement and motivation, then sort of get out of the way a little bit and let the interaction take place. Skidmore et al. Described the use of the student-led discussion boards as a best practice and, of course, a widely used tool in online teaching. And they concluded that student leadership of discussion with that element of facilitation substantiates deeper engagement and learning. And they offer multiple means of interaction and provide leadership opportunities for students and offer opportunities for varying perspectives of thought to be displayed in learning. Thorman and Fidalgo studied community building by applying graduate student moderators of an online discussion board. And in this study, they described in pretty good detail how instructors would model. They would begin the course by modeling the act of moderating the discussion activity and then assign it to students. So the students were given an example before they actually had to do it. And they reported that the leadership role of the moderator prompted student empowerment and a stronger connection to the content. It also added a motivational element. Students were motivated to more fully participate, if for no other reason, as they described it, that at some point there'll be a moderator and they'll expect the participation of their peers. So that was a motivating element. Clark and Mayer, they concluded that students preparing to teach content versus simply studying that content were more successful when they were tested on the content. So prep for and subsequent teaching of the content supported deeper learning. Zingaro concluded that even with guidance, though, the student moderators would typically apply limited variety in their questioning, and their questions promoted lower levels of thinking and analysis. So there was sort of a critique that instructors need to really monitor some of the student facilitation and work with those students in developing some of their questioning. So in summary, student involvement appears to be strongly supported in at least the research that we could find on the topic. And the element examples, written, collaboration, and constructing meaning noted by Garrison et al. Are important and should be considered in the administration of student-led forums. Garrison's descriptions of instructor presence, along with that of Orcott and Dringus, offer some useful guidance for a teacher who's getting started and learning how to do this. Strong instructor presence and training students, helping them prepare for instruction and remaining involved as it happens are all important features that should contribute to learning. Student-led forum discussions promote interaction, offer leadership opportunities, and contribute to engagement and motivation, and they contribute to success at learning more so than just traditional study of and testing on that content. And finally, as noted, Zingaro noted that the teacher's role in setting examples and overseeing the questioning process is very important. Thank you. I'll turn it over now, I believe, to Nara again.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. So, so the purpose of this current study was to examine doctoral students' perceptions regarding student-led discussion forums in online classes. This was an exploratory descriptive study. As Patrick noted, not much is available on this topic. So we decided that's one of the reasons why we also wanted to know how students feel about these student-led discussion boards. And in every course, I implemented a student-led discussion board. Then when the cohort exited from my courses, I knew they're not going to take any more course with me. I asked them to reflect on the student-led discussion boards. And the questions you see on this slide, this is the prompt that was given to students to reflect. And basically in the prompt, I asked them whether they like student-led discussions or not, why, to justify why yes or not. Would they implement student-led discussions if given opportunities to teach graduate level courses online? And again, why or why not, to explain. So the sample consisted of 65 doctoral students enrolled in a cohort model, fully online doctoral program focused on administration and leadership in higher education. The research site is a doctoral research university in Texas, and data were collected from 2014 to 2021. So the qualitative responses were coded using content analysis approach. So basically, from the learning management system, we copied all the responses to an Excel file and started coding and coming up with themes and codes to see what comes in the data. Through 2 cycles of coding, we were able to identify themes. And then after identifying themes, we took a break from the data and then let it sit, then went back again to the data to see if actually our themes are accurate representation of the data, because sometimes when you're so much in the data coding, sometimes you might see something that was under this theme, no, it should actually go under the other theme, or the codes are not talking to each other. So we kind of let the data to sit a little bit before going back and making sure that the themes are accurate representation of the data. So on the next slide, we see the top theme that came, the first theme that was present in the data was in-depth learning. In general, participants thought leading the discussion offered an opportunity for a deeper understanding of the content. It was a positive learning experience and invaluable to the learning process. These were some of the quotes from the data. When leading a discussion, they were forced to look deeper into the topic and become the expert for the week. They also thought that leading a discussion was a meaningful difference in the routine assignments. When they were completing papers, it was a different to be engaged in a discussion board, in a learning experience in this way. And they were motivated to work harder because they knew they're facilitating the discussion board. So they really have to be the expert. So it was also in-depth learning, but also motivation to look deeper into the topic. The second theme in the data was diversity of thoughts. And this is kind of my favorite theme. And this was one of the initial goals of student-led discussions when I really liked them and started implementing, was everyone brings a variety, diversity each week. They come up with excellent questions. I always tell them, I'm limited how many questions I can come up with, but you bring so many practical, relevant questions because you're practitioners in the field, you deal with everyday situations, so you bring so much diversity. And I was so pleased to see actually this theme popping up in the data. One of the reasons why they liked student-led discussions was diversity of each week. Discussion leaders had different backgrounds and experiences and brought different styles of discussion, although they had to follow certain guidelines, but they all had different style of leading it. Seeing things through other lenses and having the opportunity to create their own questions was also acknowledged by participants. They liked it. And then also another comment was about asking relevant questions related to current practice, to their own practice. So those were some of the comments, some of the codes under this theme, diversity of thoughts. The third theme was in the data was student engagement. And we all know this is a big actually topic, because in online environment, we do different activities to engage students. And sometimes we have the challenge of engaging them. They're busy, they just want to get it done, finish it. So this was the third theme, and participants felt that student-led discussions were engaging and thought-provoking. It helped them to communicate with each other. They were also able to facilitate out of the classroom conversation among the cohort. So I assume after they finished the in-class discussion, they also had their small group chat where they discussed how everyone did and what they would do as a discussion leader. And then also one important comment code under this theme is the benefits to comprehension and community building are worth it. So some of the participants felt that community building was promoted through student-led discussion boards. The last two themes in the data were teaching skills and time consuming. So obviously when we let them lead the discussion, so they gain online teaching skills. So participants valued the opportunity to gain teaching skills. They also were required to get out of their comfort zone, out of their student mode to be a faculty. And developing teaching skills were found to be useful, especially for those who are already in faculty positions, because I guess they at some point they'll be asked to teach online. And some of this data were collected before COVID. So thinking now after COVID, I'm sure everyone was asked to teach online. So probably these teaching skills were also helpful because they already had the experience of facilitating the discussion. So they knew how much time it takes to facilitate a discussion, which takes us to the last final theme, time consuming. As a faculty, another reason why I like student-led discussions is because they can lead the discussion. I can just observe from a side and intervene when I can. They gain the skills, but they also take some of the load off of my table. So I am not facilitating the discussion every week or every other week. So, but that's also time consuming. If it's time consuming for me as a faculty, then obviously it's going to be time consuming for the students too. So although some of the participants were in favor of student-led discussions, they found them to be time consuming. And one participant said the biggest drawback was that you had to prepare ahead of everyone else. So that made the workload more for that week. And I think also when planning for these student-led discussion boards, we need to consider their overall load. This particular cohort, we knew the courses they are taking. So I knew if they're having a course in that semester that is writing intensive, so maybe I will assign less student-led discussions, or instead of having a leader, I will have a co-leader. So it's always good to coordinate with the faculty teaching the same cohort if you're teaching in a cohort style program, so that you don't end up both of you having a student-led discussion and it falls on the same student on the same week. So that could happen. And it's important to kind of coordinate with your colleagues, whether they're doing it or not. And then some additional observations in the data and also from us, considering the class size is important, because if we are having a class size of 35, 45, then probably it's not a good idea to have student-led discussions. It's probably better to divide them into smaller groups and have the discussion. And then offer examples to follow. This is a quote from the data where one of the students stated that the student-led discussions were well organized and well defined, and those factors played an important role in the satisfaction of the activity. And I think we all can agree, if students don't understand the expectations, then they get confused, then they get frustrated. So you can't really expect them to do a good job if they don't know what your expectations are. And I am going to pass on to Sandra so she can offer additional discussion and some implications for practice if you're going to implement this activity. Sandra?
Thank you, Norma. Okay, well, overall, 91% of the participants liked the student-led discussion forums and they found a lot of value in them. And they stated that they would implement those discussion forums if they had the opportunity to teach online graduate courses. Also, the participants perceived that the discussions promoted in-depth learning and felt that they also benefited from the unique perspectives of others, just like Nora said. The participants were also more engaged in the discussion forum when they were assigned, the role of the leader or the expert. And they also cherished the opportunity to, to interact with their classmates on academic topics. The participants perceived that the leadership role in the student-led discussion forums promoted depth of knowledge, fostered critical thinking, and also built community. They gained teaching and leadership skills while leading the discussion forums, and many of the participants received the opportunity to lead class conversations in the discussion forum as a good practice for their careers. These doctoral students recognize the importance of developing leadership and teaching skills, as many of them were currently or on track to be academic leaders and faculty members. And so therefore, the opportunity for this skill development through student-led discussions is an activity to be considered. Also, some of the implications for practice were to provide clear expectations and specific instructions, as Nora said, regarding the role of the student discussion forum leaders. The proper modeling can offer guidance, and effective technique at leading discussion forums can contribute to content learning and contextualization. And also, based on the research of Thorman and Fidalgo in 2014 and the findings of this study, providing clear expectations, advising, and modeling will support the efficacy of this activity. Also, just like Nora said, we need to consider the time pressures, of this and the student workload, so that we don't overwhelm students that have too much on their plate. In sum, as identified by the participants, student-led discussions promote in-depth learning and diversity of thoughts, both of which are crucial components of graduate level teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Well, we are going to open up for questions. Thank you so much for if you have comments, you want to share like how you do discussion boards or any questions. And I'm going to check the chat now. I did not read the comments there. So,
Thou shalt not learn without me. I really like that, Mitch. Yeah.
I mean, we get it. I'm at a largely online institution, and whenever one way to sort of upset my academic colleagues is we call ourselves a 24/7, and you get very grumbly lecturers saying, "Oh, I'm not teaching 24/7," and that seems to be that mindset that no learning can occur without the lecturer in the room. So yeah, look, I'm a big fan of discussion-led, student-led ones. I had done it with using Kurt Bonk's idea of the starter wrapper. And we would, one student would summarize the readings, and they would ask the questions, and they would facilitate the bulletin board. And then at the end of that, the student would be a wrapper, and they would summarize the conversations. And so I was doing it weekly, but I found in order to sort of get enough, conscious of workload and to sort of get enough student engagement, a 2-week cycle. And so, yeah, and I found I would schedule that, and I would have groups of about 6 to 8. And so students, I would give a scheduled, and then students would be realizing, okay, yes, I've got to do a little bit of work for that week, but that's the work regarding that.
Yes.
So look, I found it really useful. I found it great. And yeah, and being able to sort of, get the thing happening and then just stand back from the sidelines and watch. I think we need to get out of the way of learning sometimes. Very much so. So look, thank you. I found that fascinating, and it's nice to see that. Discussion.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I normally do the summary, and one nice surprise I had several years ago, when they finished the next Monday before I would do the summary, the discussion leaders did the summary and posted for me.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So I was like, thank you. Yeah. But yeah, I usually do the summary just so that they know. It's also like the instructor presence to make sure like they know I'm there, so they're not just left on their own. But yeah, that was like one nice surprise I had. One of the discussion leaders, they said, here's the summary for you.
I used what was a terrible analogy when I thought about it, but I thought about those things were like my little ant farm, that I was able to sort of look at all the wonderful work that was happening, you know, a lot of students under glass. I don't want to hog the conversation, but do you think we've lost something? I know with the pandemic and we all jumped on the Zoom lifeboat, and that's wonderful, you know, but and I was listening to a colleague talk, and they said they were finding it hard to engage their students because, as they said, we're mostly off at a distance online, because they're looking to lots and lots of blank Zoom screens. And I thought, hang on, you're in a synchronous mode. Do you think we've lost the asynchronous for suddenly that immediacy, the need to get students online at the same time? Because I think, you know, I think to me discussion forums are beautiful because they've got that reflective element. They've got the asynchronous. I think, I don't know, I'm fearing that we've sold off the asynchronous for the synchronous, because it's what we're very familiar with, talking to groups of students at the one time.
I think, well, we have been teaching online since 2012. So the pandemic really didn't affect us so much because our doctoral program was designed to be fully online. But I do agree losing that part. And I teach also in the master's program, which is again fully online, but a lot of people are losing that part you just said, and they're just meeting on Zoom chit chat and that's it. So what I have been doing is like, no, I can't just do the Zoom and then be done. So I give them the option, like, let's say I have 5 discussion boards in a given semester. Only 2 can be a live discussion. The other 3 has to be a discussion board, or vice versa, because writing skills in graduate level, we really need them to write and reflect. And you would see always these optional Zoom sessions. Those who show up, they don't like writing, but we still want them to be able to write. So I agree with you that we are losing it because we're just saying, oh yeah, Zoom. I mean, yeah, it's easy to get there, not easy, but easier probably than writing a paper or reflecting to make sure your grammar is there and you just use proper language. So I agree, but like I said, in our program, we have been teaching fully online. It's designed to be fully online. So we use a variety of assessments. We have the discussion board, we have the papers, the dissertation assignments. So we try to mix, and then also we share with each other what we do. Like I would ask Patrick, this is what I'm doing this semester. What are you doing? So we make sure like we're not doing the same thing and they are not getting bored. So I think it's the communication between faculty, what we are doing to make sure like we're on the same page, and then we're not losing that writing part, because I know I have faculty colleagues who said, well, I'm not doing discussion boards. No, those are like out of date assignment type of assessment. No, they're not. If they're structured properly, if you have explicit guidelines, they're not. It's different when you don't have guidelines and they just get there, put a couple of sentences and that's it, they're done. So I hope I kind of, yeah, I mean, I know it wasn't a question, it was more of a comment, but.
No, it's good. Yeah, I think that it's funny, those colleagues who see discussion boards as an outdated mechanism, but they're happy to sort of do the 50-minute lecture, record it, and to their students. It's like, yeah, get a grip. Yeah.
And the students are not going to watch after 5 minutes.
Yeah, no. I mean, I've been a student at my own institution and listening to podcasts, and I'm sorry. I mean, some of them, there should be a warning: do not operate heavy machinery while listening to this podcast, because they put me to sleep. I'm sad to say. None of my current colleagues hear me, Dueta.
No, there's no need to share that screen anymore if you'd like to get rid of that, the sharing of the screen. If you
share screen, okay.
Yeah, if you want to get rid of that, that's fine. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, so we can see.
What has really struck me is, again, it's this set of assumptions that many of our colleagues have, that you can just turn on Zoom and suddenly you've got a distance course, without the questioning of the assumptions about all sorts of things. The comment that I've tried discussion boards, they don't work, tell me something else I can do. Instant. But you really have to, as you have talked about today, really go to the fine detail, the structuring, the guidance, the explicit information, the things that we take for granted when we're in an in-person environment. Actually, we shouldn't really take them for granted anyway. I do hear a lot from my colleagues, well, when they're in the same room with me, I can read the room, I can tell by their faces that they're engaged. And I have to gently stop them and say, just because a person looks engaged, does that mean they're really engaged? You know, in the online situation, you're kind of forced into that situation. You don't really know what's going on out there, especially if you can't see their faces. So you ask the question. You say, this is how we operate in this context. It's different from meeting with our colleagues in person. And you go to those lengths. I think our in-person colleague, those who teach in person, can learn a lot from the sorts of things that you have highlighted through your piece of research there. Just because you put people into groups doesn't mean that they will magically engage and talk in depth about a topic. I think you've got a lot of information and advice to share with colleagues, both those who teach online as well as those who teach in person.
Thank you. Yeah, and to add to that, like these student-led discussions might not work for every class. I don't use it in every class I teach, because like I'm teaching an academic writing and research class. No, it's not going to work in that class because, you know, the content is just different. So we can't just say, well, use this for every graduate level class you teach. So I think that's another problem we have, not only for this in general. People pick assessments, but they don't consider the content to see, is this the best assessment tool to use to deliver this content or to check the knowledge or the skills. So I think we have a disconnect there too. So
one, just as an example, one colleague I was working with, she had really effective discussion boards going, and she did something very similar to yours, but she crafted it as a provocation. So she didn't really call it discussion board. She'd talk about provocations, and each student was, the task was to take turns across the semester, and the schedule was all worked out, and there were readings there. The reading for this time was these two, and the task was to look at these readings and then make some provocative statements and provocative comments. And then the role of the rest of the class was to engage in the discussion and to respond. And they were all working professionals in early childhood, I think. So, you know, it might have been about policies of childcare or something. So, you know, they'd take on the role or whatever, they'd do whatever they needed to, just to be provocative, to get the conversation going. And the lecturers would stand back, engage a little bit, do some modeling where appropriate, but then stand back. And I thought it reflects very much the sort of thing that you're talking about today. Really, really great.
In Australia, we call that stirring the possum. Yeah.
I'd like to, sorry, just to add to this discussion is the point that it's interesting that you're talking about student-led discussion boards, because that's a very good dimension. And I'm not from that kind of a background. I've had this teacher-led discussion boards, because we've got cohorts of students, sometimes up to about 200 students, and you need to consider how much you can engage them and how much you're going to be assessing them, because when you've got a large group of students and you still have to assess, you get them to learn and then you assess them. It's sometimes you get very many students who be talking about being time poor, and they only want to do what they need to do to pass the unit. And that's a very big challenge. And when you have got students who are, engaged with work, paid work, then they still have to do their study. And they want to get engaged, but not everyone gets on board, and it's always a big test with the unit coordinator, because you want to get the students engaged, you want to assess them, and you also want to reward a good performance. And but the dimension of having student-led discussion boards also eases a little bit of the burden on the part of the teacher. And I think it's something worth following up and testing it with a group of, say, about small groups of 40, and see whether it can be applied across larger cohort of enrollments. But it's got some interesting, provoked some ideas that are useful, and a bit of literature there to fall back to. And thank you for these ideas. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, having a large group or large cohort is so challenging. So that was like one of the things, if you have a larger class size, so dividing them into smaller groups. And probably if I were to teach such a cohort, what I would do was just the idea came up, Michelle was saying, I would build on the summary in the guidelines to have it students to do the summary of the discussion. So they're having small groups leading the discussions and then doing the summary. So they get credit for it. So I build in, and then you still do, you know, like you absorb, but you're scanning through. So you're not involved in it in a deeper level. So for such a large cohort, I would make the summary to be the responsibility of the discussion leader, because that's a skill. If they're in graduate education, they need to be able to summarize the ideas, put the ideas on the paper. So it's like summarizing skills, writing skills. So that's what I would do, because for an instructor to do it, it's just impossible if you have like 100 or 200 in that large group.
Mm. Just thinking about the whole, sort of discussion boards and the whole idea of discourse. I mean, I know sort of, the sort of learning paradigm du jour is sort of, the idea of social constructivism. Do you think students undervalue, or they don't actually understand the importance of discourse and conversation in that social level of interaction in terms of their own learning, in terms about what a powerful tool it is, and in order to get students to do that? I mean, I often think I think students don't necessarily understand, or we don't tell them that in the importance of these conversations. We're not just having them to burn up some time. It's actually, these are key fundamentals to actually help you learn the concepts. We learn new concepts at a social level that then gets internalized as new knowledge. I'm just wondering, do we need to sort of explain our thinking? Well, this is why we're doing this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I would say that certainly we do. I typically tie this and about anything else I do somehow into the learning objectives.
Yeah.
And, again, this study was about, doctoral students in small cohorts. So, some of that is, I guess, intuitive, but nonetheless, I still tie it to learning objectives. But again, if you were working with large class sizes and perhaps undergraduates, I think there would certainly be a need to do that and have a discussion about why you're doing what you're doing. I think that would certainly be helpful to the learning process.
And imagine the richness if we were working at our first year undergraduates, and if they appreciated that and they learned how to facilitate discussions in terms of subsequent years into second, third, postgraduate, high degree, what the richness of the conversation would be if we just got them in from day one and sort of worked it as a sort of a developmental thing. So I'm a big fan of that program level design, because there's things you just can't do in it. We call them units, but a course, a single subject of knowledge, things you can't do within the space of a trimester or a semester. But when you look at a program level, all those skills and develop, you can be some wonderful stuff.
Applying, I'm sorry, one more piece. Applying, practicality, practical application of knowledge, especially in the doctoral program, flies pretty well in this scenario. Last we surveyed our doctoral students, all of them were working in a job related to the discipline they were planning to stay in for a long time. So they had, volumes of practical knowledge to apply in these discussions, and they knew it was valuable. And I'm sorry for interrupting you again, Nara. Please proceed.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, I agree. Like if we tell them why we are doing it, something similar I did for group work. In the master's program, I used to get lots of complaints about why are you giving us group work? So in week 1, when we have the meeting, I go over the expectations. So I tell them, I know you hate group work, but this is why we are doing group work. So the semester I started explaining them why we are doing group work, I started getting nice comments on my course evaluations on group work. But before that, like I would get these comments like, why are we doing group work in an online program? Why are we? So I think you're right. If we tell them why are we doing this, then we will have a better engagement and better buy-in. But yeah, that's how I cover myself for the group work.
Yeah, I mean, I think group work like discussion forums has to be carefully planned and crafted. Just quickly,
Yes.
at the premises of group work, we typically throw people who don't know who've never met each other, we throw them together to sort of perform a really fuzzy task, and we basically sort of stand back and let this happen. And that's the premise of all the Survivor series on TV shows. It's like group work Survivor. No wonder people have such a dim view of it. It makes compelling viewing, no doubt. But I mean, yeah. Anyway.
Did you find any rising pop stars in your rap summary, among your rap summaries?
If I did, I wouldn't be here. I'd be managing.
You take a management fee.
Yeah. It's a lot of work for everybody, isn't it? For the teacher, I think, as you said, Mitch, they don't have to be the focus, but there's a lot of work involved. They might stand back, but all the work isn't necessarily up front. And here I am, listen to me. It's all the stuff in the back, hidden side. I think that word presence that you brought up, that comes through in a lot of the literature, the students getting the sense that they have a teacher there. There's a sense of the presence of a teacher. But a teacher, in this case, is taking on a very concentrated role in managing and monitoring and scaffolding and not being the center of attention, but really focusing on the students and their engagement with the ideas and the knowledge and questioning and doing all of those sorts of things. It's a fascinating thing. And your study and your report of it today has been fantastic, actually. A really nice overview of all sorts of things. I was really surprised to hear that there was such a limited amount of literature that really gets into the heart of discussion boards. I've seen lots of literature about it, but the real analytic pieces, there's not a lot of that around. So,
and particularly from a student perspective too. It's often this is what we did, this is what we found. But actually having students, I think that's really critical too.
Yeah. I think, as I said before, I think we've got your article and your work has got a lot to say to people who teach online as well as those who do not teach online. We take so much for granted. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think I'll bring things to a close. So many thanks, Nara, Patrick and Sandra, for that wonderful presentation. The recording of the session, once we get our act together, will be uploaded to the ODLAA website. I'll just put the link here in case anybody, not that anybody watching this recording will see this, but I'll put them up anyway, put it up anyway. There it is. There are three links gone up there. The second one is to the ODLAA website itself, where you can find upcoming webinars. That's actually in this series. There's only one more this year. It's going to be run in the first week of December. The third link there is to a series of events that are being planned for the first week and the second week in November. called APOD Week, and APOD stands for the Asia Pacific Online and Distance Education Week, and it's focusing on a theme that the International Council on Distance Education has been working on global advocacy for open learning, open education resources. So it's going to be an interesting week of 3 webinars actually, and the information about those week's events appear on both the ODLAA website, but also on the FLANS website, which is the Flexible Learning Association of New Zealand. And that week is hosted by ODLAA, FLANS, and the ICDE, actually. So it should be good, some good speakers. So finally, once again, thank you very much, Nara, Sandra, and Patrick. And thank you, Mutuota and Mitch, for coming along, and Jay in his absence. Jay sends his apologies. He had to leave early. So
thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Welcome.
okay.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.